like most high school students, got a job working at a grocery store, and then I got a job working at a restaurant, cooking chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And graduated high school, no interest in going to college, going to make a career out of working for KFC. And by the way, if you're wondering where the Chicken Man stuff comes from, that's it. Been my nickname for a long time, most of my life. Well, I was dating a girl. She graduated high school. She wanted to go to college, so went to a school about 45 minutes away. And in the food industry, weekends are when you are the busiest. And so I had off a couple weekdays, and so I would go down and see her sometimes on my day off, and then she would come home most weekends, and we could go out for a little bit here or there. So I was going down. By the way, if you're wondering, it's not some straight. I ended up marrying her, so it's somebody girlfriend. I mean, yeah. So she's been stuck with me for a long time too. And so I was driving down that highway to go see her one time, and I just had this real overwhelming sense that God was calling me to be a pastor. Now, it wasn't like suddenly it came on the radio. God speaking to me. It wasn't like that. By the way, have y'all ever thought about the fact that God's voice never seems to sound like mine in the movies? So this deep, resonant, not like, people just don't think that God would have this high, squeaky voice. But anyway, it wasn't like that. It wasn't like suddenly everything went dark and this bright, shining light came from heaven. But it was a real sense that this was what God wanted me to do. And so I told the girl, it was by then my fiance, and she's like, yeah, whatever. Then I told my parents. That was an interesting event. Something I'll tell you about. It's rather humorous. Then my pastor said, you have to go to school. I was like, there's some alternative, isn't there? I said, no. So I ended up doing all the schooling that you can. Now, lots of pastors could tell you about an experience of being called into ministry. Lots of people that are missionaries can share with you this sense that God has called them to be a missionary. Unfortunately, it's often kind of subtly communicated in churches that those are the only two callings God puts on somebody's life. If you're called to be a pastor or you're called to be a missionary, but other than that, you're pretty much free to do whatever you want to. I mean, that's sort of kind of the way we view it. But that's not actually biblical at all. Everyone who is a follower of Jesus has a calling on their life. Matter of fact, the Puritans viewed your vocation as your calling by God. So today I want us to look at a man who was called by God. He is actually called into ministry, but there are some principles that apply to all of us. So if you'll turn to 1 Kings chapter 19, we'll just look at the last three verses, 19, 20, and 21. 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah has had an encounter with God. And so in chapter 19, verse 19, it says, he departed, that is Elijah. And it gets confusing when you have a guy named Elijah and a guy named Elisha. It's kind of like when you have a lady named Marie and one named Maria. You just kind of slur the end, hoping you'll sound like you're right no matter what. And so he, as Elijah, departed from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. And he left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me kiss my father and my mother, and then I will follow you. And he said to him, go back again, for what have I done to you? And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. So when it comes to the call of God on your life, the first and most obvious thing is that calling is determined by God. You don't decide, nor is there some giant kind of cage in heaven where God spins the handle and then a ball pops out and he goes, oh, well, that's what you'll do. It's not like that. It is determined by God. So notice what we have in verse 19. Elisha is plowing. Now when it says 12 yoke of oxen, this doesn't mean that he has a plow with 12 oxen in front of him. Typically what they would do is each person would have An ox and each would have a yoke, and they would plow one behind the other to dig up the ground and make it ready to go. Sometimes they even stagger, so they could do kind of multiple rows at a time. And so here they are plowing. I tell people, God called Elisha from behind the plow. He called me from behind the chicken fryer. I don't know what God has called you from behind, but God's the one who decides. Now, as these guys going by with their yoke of oxen, the last one is Elisha. And so when he comes by, he is the 12th. Now, any one of the first 11, God could have called and chosen for this task. But Elisha is the one he called. There are lots of people God could have called to be who you are and to do what you do, but you're the one that God has called. You. We think he knows your name. There may have been other people. In fact, let's just be honest. For many of us, there are people probably better qualified than you are. But that doesn't matter. God, the 11 go by, and he picks the gift. This is the one. God's the one determined that Elisha is going to, in a sense, take Elijah's place. So when he goes by, Elijah throws his cloak on him. It was an outer garment they would wrap around them. He throws it on him, and this was a sign, a symbol that Elisha has been chosen by God. Now look, let's be honest. When it comes to the calling of God in your life, this sure would make it easy, wouldn't it? I mean, you're just walking down the hall at school, and then, the cloak is laid upon you. And you know that God is called. It doesn't work that way for most of us. But the reality is, it doesn't work that way pretty much for any of us. It's more of a struggle. But for Elisha, at least it's pretty obvious that he has been selected for this task because he puts his cloak upon him. Now, I want to make sure we grasp this idea of God being the one to determine the calling. God seldom picks the most obvious person. I mean, if you're going to send Jesus in the world, would you pick a 16-year-old girl in a small little tiny country that nobody's heard of? Probably not. You'd probably pick a princess. All right, let's see. If y'all don't amen, or I just assume you're completely confused, in which case I got to try to explain a different way, and we're here a really long time. We would typically pick a more obvious selection. I mean, and rarely does God pick the obvious. There are a few. The Apostle Paul was pretty obvious because of his education and experience, and he was multilingual and all of that. But most of the time, God doesn't pick obvious people. Matter of fact, oftentimes he picks the person you wouldn't think. Let me give you an example. Samuel is told to go to the city of Bethlehem, to go to the house of Jesse, and to anoint the next king of Israel. So he shows up. The oldest son comes in, and Samuel goes, this has to be the guy. He just looks kingly. He carries himself like a king. I mean, this has got to be the one. And God says, yeah, I don't think so. Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks on the heart. He's not the one. And then they just go by, one brother after another. 7 brothers go by, and nope. And then Samuel goes, is there anybody left? I'm sure what Samuel's thinking is, I misunderstood what God wanted. This is not the city, this is not the house, because the dude ain't here. And they go, well, yeah, there's the runt. Well, where is he? He's out watching the sheep. Now understand, watching the sheep for a young teenage boy in those days was like getting your first job at a grocery store or at a fast food place flipping burgers. I mean, this is entry-level work. And so he brings him in, and God says, this is him. You may have heard of him, David, the greatest king in all the Old Testament, the one that God's going to make a promise to the Messiah would come from him. David was not the obvious choice. He was not the one that most people would have picked. But God, you know why God usually picks the not so obvious? So that God gets the credit and we don't take it from him. And so God determines the calling in your life. The second thing about the call of God is that this means that you and I have to prioritize life. There are some decisions that are going to come from God's call in your life. Look what he does, verse 20. He left the oxen and ran after Elijah and said, let me kiss my father and mother. In other words, let me not just say goodbye to mom and dad, but let me take care of all of the affairs at home that will need to be taken care of when I leave. In other words, I need a few months or a couple years to make sure that everything is in place before I leave. And so Elijah said, well, go ahead. What have I done to you? Like, if that's what you're going to do, if that's your higher priority, then you need to go back and do that. In other words, what Elijah is saying to him is, you have to come to the commitment that that God is number one. So let me see if I can break it down for you into 3 categories that we find where we have to make a decision about our priorities. The first one is things. Important things. He has to leave the oxen. Someone said this, even in our churches, our people are influenced by the secular emphasis on the instant gratification of personal whims and desires. A young person planning a career will consider likes and dislikes, the prospects for financial gain, and the possibilities for constant employment. The question, what is God's will for me, is seldom asked. But the reality is, the call of God is to be more important than anything that we might possess. It is number one. A second area are achievements. What are they doing? They're sowing the fields. To do what? To grow food. To do what? To make money. To achieve a crop. The reality is that we like achievement. You don't believe me? Pull out your phone. Grab your note app. So just pull out your phone, grab your note app, or if you're really, really, really old school, you can get a pen and paper. Now, no one is going to see this, so I want you to be honest. I want you to put down a couple of achievements in life, a couple of things you've done that you feel give you worth, that give you value. You should not have to think about it long. Now, here's what's interesting. When you ask this question in church, we have an idea that we have to divide everything in life. And there's the God stuff and there's everything else. So because we're in church, because the pastor asks us what we feel like has worth, we all want to put, my relationship with Jesus, my family. Listen, there's nothing wrong with achieving something that you feel gives you some value. I spent 9.5 years, 9.5 straight years, taking a maximum load, 3 years in college, 21 hours a semester. Got permission to take extra hours on seminary to finish a 4-year master's in 2.5 years, and then to do a PhD. It probably took years off my life, but it was an accomplishment. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of sacrifice. I have my diploma hanging on my wall. Some of you have something like that you've achieved in life. You rebuilt a car. Y'all look at me like, we're not supposed to do this. This is so unspiritual. We're supposed to say something like, my prayer life. But no, if you're honest, we have achievements. The issue is not we have to say just the Jesus stuff and everything else is wrong. What we have to say is any accomplishment that we have achieved is not as important as the call of God on your life. Our ultimate value comes from following God and obeying Him. That may involve some accomplishments and achievements. It's okay. You have things you're proud of. So how do you know that? Because you put the trophy somewhere on display. We hang certificates on the walls. This is what we do. There's nothing wrong with that unless that becomes your ultimate value and worth. Now your priorities are out of whack. There's nothing wrong with growing food. Nothing wrong with having good crops. So what Elijah is doing here is not telling Elisha, look, what you've been doing is wrong. What he's saying is you need to prioritize your life to make this the highest priority. So when you think about what gives you, what you have accomplished that would give some value and worth and meaning to your life, there's nothing wrong with that unless that's more important than the call of God on your life. So when you prioritize your life, the Jesus stuff should come first. Then the other things should flow from that and a part of the call of God on your life. But don't think that everything you've done in life is somehow sinful unless it's a Jesus thing. It's about where we put our value. And so Elijah says you need to leave this behind. So important things, important achievements, and then important people. There are people that are important in my life. Hopefully there are people that are important in your life. Now, by the way, it's really easy to define what we mean by somebody that's important. Somebody that's really, really of the highest importance in your life, you would die for them without thinking twice. There would be no consideration. You wouldn't say, let me pray about that. For the rest of you, I would have to think about it for a while. I'm being honest. If it came to one of my kids, my grandkids, my wife, I wouldn't think twice. I would die for them. I'm sorry that none of you children have a parent who's willing to die for you. Not a single parent said amen. I feel so bad for you. I would do it in a heartbeat. Without thinking about it, I would give my life for my kids or my grandkids or my wife. But other people I'd have to think about. This is father and mother. So Jesus put it this way in Matthew. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Jesus does not say don't love your parents. He does not say don't love your children. What he says is that if we're going to prioritize life, Jesus is to be the most important person in your life. And so, important things, important achievements, and important people. Let me see if I can kind of help us to grasp how serious this is and what it means when we talk about the call of God on your life. So I'm going to see if I can demonstrate for us here what this looks like. This is the ladder of success. So many strive to get to the top of the ladder. So I make sacrifices. Time, energy, investment, but here I am. And then that promotion means I had to miss some stuff in my kid's life, but it was worth it because I got the promotion. I made the sales quota, whatever it was I did. And then I had to outperform some other people. So I had to work lots of late nights, and my family suffered, and my health suffered. But it's okay, because I got to this wrong. I'm willing to make it. And then I actually had to beat someone out by making them look bad so that I would look better, so that I could get to the next rung on the ladder. And here's what happens. We get to the top of the ladder. You know what the worst thing in all of life is? When you finally make it to the top and you realize the ladder's leaning against the wrong wall. You see, what the Bible's telling us here is that achievement is not the problem. Goals in life are not the problem. The problem is in when your whole life is about climbing a ladder that's leaning on the wrong wall. The right wall is that the ladder of your life is leaning on and supported by Jesus Christ. And so the call of God in your life says this is the highest priority. Make sure that your life is leaning against the right wall. And then the third thing that we see is that the call of God on your life oftentimes means we've got to break with the past. Look what happens in verse 21. And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them. So he takes the animals, burns them, and then he cooked them with the yoke. So he uses the wood from the yokes to make the fire, and then he cooks the animals, and then he gives them, they have a picnic, for lack of a better description. And then he rose and went after Elijah and assisted him. It was a complete break. He doesn't say, hey, somebody take care of the yoke and the oxen, because if this doesn't work out, I'll be back in a few months. He doesn't keep a handhold. He makes a break with the past by burning it all, by getting rid of all of it. And then he makes this radical commitment. He arose and went after Elijah. You know, why is that so radical? Because he has no idea where he's going. He has no idea what he's going to do. Oftentimes the call of God on your life doesn't come with a roadmap. It simply comes with a chauffeur. I'm not going to say, Jesus, take the wheel. I don't listen to country music, and I don't. But that's the idea, that you just get in the car, and wherever God takes you, that's where you go. And so Elisha doesn't just get rid of the past, but he also makes a very focused commitment to the future, that the call of God on his life is the highest calling in his life. Here's how Simon de Vries put it. There's only one direction for a disciple to go, forward, and that without misgivings and regrets. If he cannot make this commitment, it's better that he should stay home with his oxen. And so, if we're going to follow the call of God in our life, it means we're going forward and we cut the things from the past. There was a painting done by Ian Ligua called Broken Bridges. This is what it looks like. See, what happens sometimes is that when we feel God calling us to do something, we want to bungee cord ourselves to the past just in case the whole God thing doesn't work out. We want to box it up and put it away, because if the whole follow Jesus thing doesn't go like we thought it was going to go, then we can go and pull the stuff out of the box. You and I have to break the bridges. We have to say, you know what, I'm on this side of the river and there's nowhere going back. I have cast my lot with Jesus Christ and there is nowhere else for me to go. I put my full faith and commitment with Him and to Him and for Him, and it will never change. I am with Him to the end, no matter what happens. That is what Elisha does. And so you and I have this calling from God. Now, I want to go back to driving down the highway. God called me to be a pastor. You know, there's a more important call that happened in my life. Because a call to pastor is irrelevant, worthless, and meaningless unless there's a call that came before that. And that happened in church service when I was 6 years old, when the Holy Spirit called me to put my faith in Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. The most important call in life is when Jesus calls you to be one of His own. When God reaches down and convicts you of your desperate need for the forgiveness that comes only in Jesus Christ. But I don't want us to think that's the only call in life. Like after I'm saved, then the rest of my life is mine. It's not like that. That's the call, and then God is going to call you to other things in life. I love it when someone says, I want to start this ministry, I want to be involved in this ministry because I feel like it's what God's calling me to do. And when people are like that, it doesn't matter how difficult or challenging it gets, they cannot get away from the fact this is what God has called me to do. And we stick with it. We stay with it because God is the highest priority in our life.